viewers and learners of the MEVE 001 Environmental Impact Assessment for Environmental Health. I introduce myself as Dr. Sushmitha Baskar, working in the discipline of Environmental Studies at the School of Interdisciplinary and Transdisciplinary Studies, Indira Gandhi National Open University, New Delhi. Today we will discuss on the environmental impact assessment of a cement and a tourism industry, giving some examples. The learning objectives of this module, it includes the explanation of the potential impacts of a cement industry project and of that of a tourism industry project. So you may think that how can tourism also impact the environment? We will see how that by even the tourists themselves can actually emit a lot of the environmental pollution, and by throwing and disposing of waste in an unscientific manner, they can also contribute to the pollution and the environment in a great way. In the same way, the cement industry, okay, the raw materials that are used in the cement, it could be the Portland cement, it could be different types. They can contain certain silicates, they can contain the limestone particles. So all this will also impact the environment and bring about degradation of the environment. It can bring about a major change in the air quality, in the water quality, and in the vegetation and the other land aspects of that area where a proposed project is being coming up. First, let us understand the cement manufacturing process. So all of you will be knowing that cement, this is whitish or grayish or greenish in color, and this is a complex process, and it begins with the mining. So after mining, then the grinding of the raw material takes place, and that includes the limestone and the clay, which becomes a fine powder, and that is referred to as a raw meal. This is then heated to a sintering temperature. It can be as high as 1450 degrees centigrade in a cement kiln. So that is how the cement is manufactured. The raw materials that are used for making cement, they normally include limestone, clay and marl, and these are extracted from the quarries by blasting or by ripping using the heavy machinery. In India, if we see, the limestone reserves are quite a lot. You find them in the Meghalaya, in those regions, and in certain southern regions also we find a good amount of the limestone. And there are a lot of good companies which are manufacturing the cement, and very good ones even in the south of India. They actually have the proper environmental rules over there, and they even convert the fly ash and other materials that are coming out of their processing, the products that are coming from their processing, and they have recycled and reused them for certain other materials, maybe for the road purposes or for making certain blocks, eco-friendly environmental blocks, for the construction purpose and so on. So even the final products can also be converted into the non-toxic and useful products later on. So basically a cement is a binder, okay, that is actually binding agents together. It is a substance which is used for construction that can set, it can harden and adhere the other materials to bind them together. So you would have seen in the construction places, even when you are constructing your own houses or the companies, the cement is being used. So first you will see that the little bit of that red soil or the clayish material, then you use the gravel, then you use the cement. All this is actually mixed together, and sometimes even certain binding agent like the Fevicol powder is also used. Then they are all mixed with water, and in that kind of a consistency that it can hold the blocks or the bricks together. So here you will find the clay bricks which are put together, and they are bound in between with this cement plastering material, and then after that also the outer plastering is done. And also for the roofing, where the lentils have to be done for the roofing of all the houses. Here again there are big machines that come. It is also the ready-made cement and the gravel mixer, and there all these materials are put into it, and that keeps rolling as in a mechanized way. And then it has the special equipments where they can be spread out evenly on the top of the buildings, on those beams, and they can then bind them together, and after hardening, then that becomes a very solid airtight and waterproof thing which is used in the construction purposes. So basically cement is used to bind the sand and the gravel together. So it is a binding agent where I have explained the process, and with this fine aggregate products it can produce the concrete which is used for the roofs and for the other parts of the building areas. The initial calcination reaction in the production of the cement, that is responsible for about 4% of the global carbon dioxide emission. So it is not that the cement industry is free of the environmental impacts, adverse environmental impacts that they are creating. It is responsible for a certain amount of the global carbon dioxide emission, contributing to greenhouse gases and the global warming. The overall process is responsible for 8% of the global carbon dioxide emissions. The cement kiln, this is fired by the coal or the petroleum coke, and that is due to the flame that is required to heat the kiln by the radiant heat transfer. As a result, the production of cement is a major contributor to climate change. The most common type of cement is a hydraulic cement, and this hardens by hydration of the clinker material when the water is added. The hydraulic elements and the cements, these include the Portland cement, and it is made of a mixture of silicates and oxides, and this is what we are using normally. Now the silicates are responsible for the cement's mechanical properties. Now when we are conducting an environmental impact assessment survey of such cement projects, then we need to identify the positive and the negative alterations of the natural and human environment which may affect the quality of life, as well as present and the future options for sustainable social and economic development in the operation area of influence. We need to identify and prevent discuss the preventive and mitigation measures to minimize the negative impacts and enhance the positive impacts of the project design alternatives. We need to determine whether the proposed operation is the optimal or at least a viable solution to the development needs it addresses after the cost and benefit of the impacts, mitigated or not, are internalized, and to recommend a course of action including the preventative or mitigation measure after comparing the alternatives, including that of no action. A description of the proposed operation and its objectives, these need to be outlined. So an analysis of the project which is involving a description and evaluation of the impact, the cost benefit analysis of the considered alternatives, including a no project option, the rationale for selecting the proposed alternative, and description of its impacts. So whatever you are submitting, that project should contain all these aspects. Then there should be a description of the institutional and legal environmental framework associated with the project, including specific legal requirements if it is required. Then the human and the environmental risk assessment need to be written down clearly. Risk assessment can be focused on the consequences to the health of the plant workers and the nearby residents and resulting from the operational accidents or the emergencies, because even during the operational phase, during the construction phase, there can be certain accidents that can occur. So whether the health of the plant workers will be affected, whether there can be human health problems in the nearby areas also, whether people will be affected. This may entail the evaluation of low probability event and the human health consequences over both short term and the long term time periods. Similar concepts could be used in the conduction of the ecological risk assessment from the plant accidents or emergencies. Such assessment encompass the evaluation of the probability and resulting adverse effects on the non-human terrestrial or aquatic population or resulted and related ecological systems. Then the resettlement plan. Okay, because you need to analyze and write down the risk assessment regarding the engineering, the health and the environmental aspects, whether there is any emergency response and contingency plan that is included in the project, the industrial hygiene the workers can follow, whether there is a worker safety plan, the public consultation plan, because you can even discuss with the public people and also with the people who have years of experience. The environmental site assessment that will consist of evaluating the existing soil, the geology of that area, the groundwater, the surface water contamination at the proposed plant sites. So the site assessment is very much required. That forms the first part before the entire study will be conducted. Then the environmental health and safety compliance audit also needs to be done. Then the description of the proposed built development or the land use is expected, such as the port facility, chalk pits, limestone, clay, the pyrite, gypsum and sand sources and their reclamation. storage facilities like raw material, product and waste, the buildings, installations from the materials that are coming out from the kilns, the mills, the grinders, the separators, the heat exchangers, the stacks, then the tanks which are placed above the ground, which are underground, then other products which are hazardous material, special materials such as the radioactive substances, asbestos, then the ozone depleting compounds, radon, other waste emissions and discharges and the associated infrastructure. On all these aspects, the detailed description has to be given. Then the location of all the facilities, direct, indirect and associated. For example, the transport of the raw material, if we have to transport the sources from where we will transport the raw material, then the finished product how that also will be transported, then the source of the power from where the power is going to be sourced, and the appropriate query operations. So these tools, the techniques and the methodology of the operation, all this needs to be described clearly. And one important thing is the reason and the need for the development, why this project has to come over there and what is the need for the development of this project, and also the employment opportunities that it can give, like how much of employment it can give to the residents and the population out there. Then the designation or the restrictions such as zoning which can affect the site, because if there is some environmental impact that can occur, then whether any specific zoning has to be carried out, whether that can also be taken out and done. Then you can determine if there are any protected zones in that surrounding area. For example, if there are important nature reserves, then there is any drinking water that the local people are using, the groundwater reserves, the surface water reserves, then whether there are any recreational areas, for example parks where children or the elderly are using, where people are using for yoga or other recreational activities. All this can be affected by the proposed development. So these also need to be written down, baseline studies have to be carried out and determine whether these kind of reserves and areas exist before the proposed development. Now the site description will be carried out using maps and plans, and the aerial photograph can be done, that can be used and provided. Then also the geographical information systems can be used, remote sensing can also be used, so that the entire area can be mapped out and photographed well for the proper planning and usage. The land use in the surrounding area, both the urban and the rural, for example housing, for industrial activity, for agriculture, for fishing and for recreation, this has to be written down. Then the distance from the surrounding towns and the communities. So wherever the project site is going to be carried out, what is the distance from that place to the surrounding town, to the community, and in that town or the community, what is the population size, the characterization of the socio-economic composition, like what are the employment that they are doing, what are the occupations that they are occupied with, they are employed in, the sources of their livelihood. For example, are they using the aquaculture, or are they doing some basket weaving, are they doing some jute manufacturing, and such type of activities are they going on? Are they involved in the agricultural activities? Are they doing in the coconut farm rearing, and those fibers are they being used for the carpet industry? So what kind of occupation they are doing, or are people employed in the government sector, whether they are working in the companies, in the educational institutions, then how many health clinics are there in that area, that is also important. Then we need to know the ethnicity over there, the tribal populations that are inhabiting that area, because they may also have their own roots, rooted to their culture and their society. For example, in the tribal places, the people will always see, even if you are going to visit any cave or any limestone zone area, they will always see that what kind of things that you are bringing out of that area. For example, any kind of the animal bones that can be used in the jewelry or any other kind of activity. In the same way, whether any precious metal is being taken out of that place, because then they will all start surrounding you. They will not allow you to take even the water, because they will think that that is being sourced or used for some other purposes. So those local residents also have to be taken into consent, they need to be taken into consideration, and detailed discussions have to be done with the local communities before formulating any of these projects, and they should not be affected with any internal motive. Then the gender of the people, how the gender and also the education levels and the background of the people, this also has to be described clearly. because accordingly the mitigation measures and the plans can be chalked out accordingly. The site plans must show the maximum land area that will be affected by the proposal. That can include the port facilities, the quarries, the pits, then the chand, the chalk, limestone, pyrite, gypsum. So, what kind of the mineral that is going to be mined out and that can be used in this project, the sand extraction areas, then the storage area where you are going to store it, because it is not that the limestone and the cement manufacturing, even after in the processing also, every step you are going to take out, then you will going to store that part in an area, then after that again that will be processed for the further process in the mechanized equipments. Then the cement plant location, this also needs to be detailed and outlined. Then the layout plan for the development showing buildings, stacks, storage area for the raw material and waste, the roads, then the parking facilities, infrastructure including all the utilities such as fuel filling station, the power supply, the water supply. Because if you have seen the cement industry, okay, they will have these kilns and they will have all this long tractors and mechanized belts and conveyors, where from one part to another part things are being transported and being put. And so even there again they will be operating on the power supply on certain diesel or certain generators. So where even these infrastructure also the power is going to come from, are there any fuel filling stations that are nearby where they can use it for their activities. Then water also is required in large amount. So the water supply, from where are they going to source the water from. Then the elevations, the cross sections, the plans of all the built development which are supported by the photos and other similar methods, that should also show the visual appearance of that area that is being proposed. Then a description of the extent and types of the industrial development proposed. This should be taken into account. Then the flow chart of the proposed activity and the information on the input rate, for example, the raw material, the water, the chemicals that are going to be used, then the output rates, the wastewater, the solid, the hazardous waste and the air emissions. So maybe flow charts and network diagrams can be used in order to formulate this. And in the cement industry, a lot of wastewater is being released. So even this wastewater also, is there any primary and secondary treatment that is going to be done, and then will that be discharged? That also needs to be described. Then in that wastewater treatment, how is the treatment going to be done? Whether you have in the physical screening process, whether large screens and grids are available, and then whether any treatment plant is available, whether biological treatment is going to be done, chemical treatment using alum and others, or coagulation is going to be done. So what type of chemicals will be employed? In the same way, in the biological treatment also, are the facilities existing? Can they be done? For the air emissions, do they have any stack filters? Do they have electrostatic precipitators, or any damping equipment where the particulate material or the emissions can be substantially reduced? These also need to be written down and described clearly. Sand, limestone, clay, pyrite, gypsum and chalk extraction activities, water catchments, port facilities, transportation, storage of the raw material, cement processes which are basically the grinders, the preheaters, the pre-calciners, the kilns, then the storage silos, parking facility, packing facilities, everything. This has to be outlined clearly. Then they need to list the machinery and the process equipment. Technical information has to be given according to the capacity, the expected hours of operation, then the emissions regarding nitrogen oxides, sulfur oxides, dust and also the noise levels that will be liberated as a result of these project activities. An estimate of the essential types and expected consumption of the raw material. So, what are the type of the raw material that is going to be used, and the amount of the expected consumption, the amount that will be also be used in the process. The granulated blast furnace slag from the iron industry, aluminum silicate from the refining of oil, oxyton, that regeneration of the aluminum scrap, calcines, which is an intermediate product from the cellulose industry, fly ash from the electrostatic filters at the power plant fuel types. So, all this needs to be taken into account, and these are certain examples that have been taken from the industries that have conducted certain EIAs. Then, whether any stabilization structures or earthworks including the dredging, reclamation, excavation or land filling associated with these are being done, the quantities of the material to be moved to or from the site, the method of disposal of the excess material, the sources of material to be brought to the site, Details of the construction workforce, expected numbers, the work camps in the construction period, like how many people will be employed there, how many the company is going to employ, the construction workforce, the expected number, and whether they are going to work in shift, then the camp arrangement, how are they going to stay, all this during the construction period, it should be described clearly. Then details of any emergency, evacuation and security plan. In case of any blast, is the health of those people going to be affected? So will there be any medical camp, any medical center, any hospitals, doctors or nurses or medical personnel will be employed there? The stockpiling of medicines and certain first aid measures have to be there. Then on the site, 24-hour availability of doctors and nurses should be available. Then in case of any problem, whether there is any safety and evacuation, an alternate evacuation route, so that the people can follow that and they can move out. Otherwise, large chunks of rocks and this can actually hamper their health and survival. Finally, the land characteristics, the air quality, the water quality, the geology, the soils, the habitats. In the habitats, the terrestrial and the aquatic habitats need to be assessed, whether there are any endangered species in that area, whether there are any national parks and protected areas which are of interest. All this has to be taken into account. Social services such as availability of surrounding clinics, hospitals, schools, the sanitation facilities, water treatment and landfills have to be noted down. The water bodies and surface water, for example, rivers, the lakes and the canals, the use of these like fishing, in water supply, in navigation and in irrigation. The habitats, it can be natural habitat as well as the man-made habitats for the flora and also the fauna. They also have to be described, whether they exist and how they will be tackled and be cared for well. This is an example of an EIA of a proposed cement plant which was to come up in southwestern Nigeria. It was done by scientists in the year 2013 and it focused on the EIA of the cement plant at southwestern Nigeria. So here they were manufacturing the Portland cement which causes environmental pollution. They suggested that dust, noise, gases and vibration can occur during the blasting in the quarries and a good amount of carbon dioxide is also released. Their study reported that the soil erosion will occur as the topsoil will be exposed as a result of bush clearing and excavation. There will also be a loss in the flora and the fauna and significant impacts on the ecology and the biodiversity of the area will be impacted. The loss of the vegetation canopy will also occur. Dust can be released from the point source or from the diffused sources. This cement dust can affect the health of the employees working in the plant and also the communities who are living nearby. Therefore, the mitigation measures such as electrostatic precipitators and fabric filters will have to be installed. Then they also say that the operation phases will create significant noise pollution. So the sufficient hearing protection should be provided. For example, the ear mufflers and certain helmets, the eye goggles, all this should be provided in order for the eye and the ear to be protected during the operation and the construction phases for the workers in that region. The potential sources of the vibration, they say that is blasting in the quarries, piling in the construction, road traffic and the heavy machinery. They can also cause distress among the communities and these were some of the main conclusions of their study. So that was everything about the environmental impact assessment of a cement industry. Now let us briefly describe impact assessment due to tourism. We are all fond of tourism and when people migrate from one place to another, they like to take a break from their normal activities and tourism can be of various types. It could be a religious tourism, it could be environmental tourism or ecotourism, it could be tourism of the general kind like meeting people, understanding and appreciating different cultures, learning a different language, and some people they like to tour and like to meet people, like to understand the languages, the culture, the dressing style, the cuisine and so on. So you can actually gather honey while traveling and the tourism industry is a hotspot industry and it actually attracts a lot of employment and lot of people globally from the entire world. Now certain parts, if you see in the environmental area in the domain, certain parts will attract more tourism capabilities. For example, the coastlines. So in India, for example, if you see Goa or if you see Kerala, the beaches, they are a hotspot for tourism. They attract lot of tourists in that area from the national as well as the international travelers. And there again, the tourism can also be during certain times. For example, if there are certain festivals, like in Jodhpur and in Jaisalmer, we have the sand festival. So during that festival, people like to go to that area, understand, like what is going on, and how this culture and the tradition is being followed for ages, for centuries. And then there are also specific areas, like in Rajasthan again you have the Chaukidani area. There you find the food which is exotic, and the entire food of the Rajasthan area can be tasted, and everything fried from sweet to sour is at one place. Then you have the local, you have the camels, the local animals that are there, that can give you short rides, and children are normally amused and happy by these events. In the same way, for the elderly people, they have certain astrological and certain horoscope things which they can be they can use their time with. Then there is also dance, then there are amusement parks. So tourism can actually offer a lot to a wide variety of people, and the economic foundations of tourism are essentially the cultural assets, the cultural property, and the nature of the travel location. So as I said, even in the foreign countries, Greece, then you have France, they attract a lot of the tourist industry. In the same way, the economic criteria is also an important factor. The cheaper tickets, and also the places that are cheap for the tourists themselves, because you need to see the conversion value when you are traveling from a lesser developed country, from an Asiatic region, maybe some of the European region, the East European regions, that may be cheaper for the travel when compared to United Kingdom or the Scandinavian countries, which may be very expensive, and they are also a high tax paying nations like Switzerland, like Norway, where they are all high tax paying countries. So you can also budget yourself and decide where the tourism has to be done. So that way also the tourism industry is impacted by various economic factors. And the World Heritage Sites, they are particularly worth mentioning today because they are real tourism magnets. For example, the Stockholm in Sweden, you have this Nobel Museum where every year the Nobel Prize is being given. The Alfred Nobel Prize is given to the Nobel laureates. So there, that part, it is in the Gamlastan area, and here again that attracts a lot of tourists, and the people can enter there with the fee that is provided. And the outer side you have the sea and the nature in its pure and real sense. It's just undisturbed, where you can enjoy the sun and that beautiful park, and inside you can actually see those halls, the Nobel and the areas where the people who have done wonderful scientific research, who have contributed a lot to science and to society, where they are awarded the highest honor for their work. So these are World Heritage Sites. In the same way, the tourism can be mass tourism, then it can be the niche tourism, and it can also be the winter tourism. Therefore, tourism brings a large amount of income into the local economy. It generates and creates opportunities for employment, and some examples include the hotels, the resorts, the homestays, restaurants, amusement parks, the shopping malls, music points, theatres, even the souvenir malls also are places of tourism. And the hospitality industries which benefit from tourism include those which are the transportation services, because you need to be transported from one place to another for the tourism purpose. They include the airlines, the ships, the cruises, the trains, the cabs, the buses. All these are included in the tourism industry. So holistic and comprehensive tourism carrying capacity should be included in the environmental impact assessment study, and the development of any area must respect the voice of the local communities. Three important dimensions of the tourism have to be considered, and they include the physical, ecological, socio-demographic, and the political economic factors. Tourism also puts enormous stress on the local land use, and that can lead to social erosion, increased pollution, habitat loss, and pressure on the endangered species, and it can destroy the environmental resources on which the tourism itself can depend. So thereby it can be considered as highly sensitive to climate change, and it also contributes emissions to greenhouse gases, one of the causes of the global warming. Now the main objectives of the EIA in context of this sustainable tourism in the coastal region, for example, you need to make significant decision makers should be aware of the environmental effects of the proposed outline projects. They need to provide certain alternatives with the different environmental impacts. They need to mitigate and give the approaches how to avoid and reduce the environmental damage on the coastal regions, prevent coastal degradation, disclose the public and the reason for the approval of the project with the significant environmental effect, foster coordination among the stakeholders and enhance the public participation in the decision making, especially when it is connected in a coastal area. Therefore, islands are sensitive areas that can be threatened by environmental problems. One example that is given here is a Mauritius island, and this Mauritian ecosystem is threatened because there is decrease in the population of native birds and reptiles. In the same way, habitat destruction and tourists also litter and pollute the islands. So viewers and learners, we have understood in this module regarding the environmental impact assessment of the tourism industry and also that of the cement industry. I hope you have had a good understanding of the same. Thank you.